Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming to our webinar today. On Life of the Modern CISO, we're really happy to have a special guest, Wendy Nather, along with Matt Tesauro, the founder and CTO of DefectDojo. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Matt to get started with the introductions. Thank you. And if you do have questions during the session, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get them to the panelists.
Awesome. Yes. So I am, as Dawn said, Matt Tesauro, CTO and co-founder of DefectDojo Inc. Been doing this AppSec thing for quite some time. And luckily, in that course of doing this AppSec thing, I ran into this person named Wendy Nather. And to my great pleasure, she offered me a job. And I said yes. So I got to work for her, which was really super fantastic. Had a great time at TEA, actually, the Texas Education Agency. And so yeah, and then I've been doing this AppSec thing ever since. That was my first, I think, officially badged AppSec job, although I think I was called a system analyst or something goofy because nobody knew what this AppSec thing was back then. And Wendy, do you want to give folks a quick intro?
Yeah, hi, I'm Wendy Nather. I've been a CISO in the public and private sector. I've been an industry analyst. I was a research director at one of the ISACs and an advisor in a lot of different capacities. And as Matt mentioned, we work together. It's been 15 years now. Can you believe it?
Oof.
We worked together 15 years ago, and there might even possibly be an attendee on this webinar who also worked with us, and that was a wild time. It really was the wild, wild west of AppSec, so I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, probably my favorite thing that happened there was when one of the QA people, or actually we call them independent validation and verification, or IV&V. One of them came up to me and said, "Man, you've really shook things up around here. It's been great."
Oh, I remember when somebody else in the support team came to me and said, "We didn't have security problems until you showed up."
Oh, you did. You just didn't know about them.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Okay, well, let's get started. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, I mean, this is going to be no shock to anybody who's been in this field for a bit, but it sure doesn't seem like attacks and security events are going down. They're rather going up and spreading around. So, for the modern CISO, if I'm trying to do the right security practices, what are the things I should adopt? What methods, what practices, what are the things that an organization should consider adopting from a CISO perspective?
Well, the whole theme of this was kind of like how to keep up with what's going on. And I'm not sure it's possible to keep up with everything going on. Things are just getting more and more complicated, abstracted, outsourced, and everything like that. So it's really tough to give a one size fits all sort of list of practices that people should be doing. I mean, you know better than I do what you're able to do, what you're not able to do, what kind of environment you're working in. There are some things that conventional wisdom says that you should be doing in AppSec that you just cannot do. So, being realistic about this, I guess one of the practices that I would encourage is uh, kind of ABI, always be inventorying, because that seems to be one of the biggest challenges. It sounds really basic, but I've found over the years that just because it's basic doesn't mean it's easy.
Uh,
So,
yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
you're flashing me back to a application that we found about a hurricane that had happened in the state of Texas. I don't know, 3, 4 years prior that was still up and running, right? So talk about like, I think, I mean, the hurricane that happened was bad, and there was a lot of people displaced, and it was not a great event. But 4 or 5 years after, I think the need for this hurricane specific website was probably no longer there, but it was still up and running because, emergency, throw it up, let's get it going. That was a very valid effort, but the inventory wasn't there, and it just fell off people's radar.
Yeah, yeah. And to kind of make things even more interesting, yes, we've had tools and things for inventorying applications, however you define what applications are. And now we've got the wonderful SBOM coming out. the software bill of materials. Shout out to Alan Friedman. Yay, we love Alan Friedman. And that just takes things up another level or down another level into the granularity of, okay, what is this application actually using? And what do we need to know about it? Which kind of leads to the question of, okay, assuming you can get an SBOM today from one of your software providers, what do you do with it? And I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
Well, it's interesting, and I forget. I was at an OWASP event, and there was someone from a department of the U.S. government. I forget which, like Department of Ed, Department of Ag, a large governmental department, and they had been doing this SBOM thing for a while now because of the executive order. And he said, I have this huge database, darn near data lake, right, somewhere between a pond and a lake, I guess, of SBOM information. He goes, I'm capturing it. I have it because I was told to keep it. I have no idea what to do with it. Right.
Mhm.
So like it's the other half of having an inventory is making it actionable.
Yeah.
Right. And so having this giant collection of all of the bits of software from third party providers or open source libraries or whatever that makes up the software that you're running is great. But if you can't action that, it's just a list. Right. At some
Yeah.
point you need to do
Yeah.
the Santa thing. I'll be on brand in terms of month. And you need to decide who's naughty and nice, right? And if you can't do that with your list of software bill of materials, you have a problem.
Yeah, so one thing I often you're absolutely right that if you can't do something with it, if you can't make decisions based on it, it's not helping you. I do recommend it. I mean, there are a lot of different ways that you can use an SBOM, and one of I think the most straightforward is for procurement
Hmm.
because you can do this in advance. You can talk with your procurement folks, your legal team, and whatever, and you can say, are there some binary decisions we can make in advance? Like if it says that it was made in, pick a country, we're not acquiring it. That's a binary that we can both agree on beforehand. It can be part of the procurement process. It can use the SBOM. Binary decisions are a lot easier to do something with, especially if you can prep them in advance. But the rest of it, yeah, yeah, it's tough.
Well, even this reminds me of back in the earlier days of InfoSec and AppSec, where one of the vendor things you could do is just ask if they've ever had a pen test. And if
Uh-huh.
they scratch the head and go, pen test,
A what?
right? Like that's a sign, right? It's a subtle signal about the maturity of the organization you're working with. And if they can't produce an SBOM, that might give me pause right there. That may be the first binary decision. Like can't produce an SBOM? Ooh, how mature is your software development process? Probably not very.
Yeah, yeah, and that is a new indicator signal, relatively new, that you can use along with sending questionnaires and all sorts of other things.
Oh,
Um,
don't get.
a- Another practice that I'd recommend is, try to align with the business development cycles, because nobody likes it if you dump a whole 500-page report on them and go, can you go fix this, please? In the middle of, most engineering organizations have their resources really tightly scheduled. And if you can't fit into what's already being done, both from the engineering resource standpoint and with the QA and everything else that's in your development life cycle, you're a disruptor. You're not, that they have to argue with or fight. You're not helping.
Yeah, that's a huge thing. Like for organizations that aren't necessarily very fast in their deploy process, one of the things I've done with great success is run early scans that were unofficial. I'm
Mhm.
going to run a weekly scan of whatever's in your repo, and you're going to hear about it for the 3 months it takes you to do a release. Because this in this one org, they were doing quarterly releases, right? So they have a release every quarter. I had gave them a quarter worth of scans, and they had no surprises when it came down to release time, what the security view of their software looked like. And I told them that 2 weeks out of their release, these things go from, hey, just letting you know, to these are real. And you
Mhm.
can choose when you want to prioritize them. And I've given you as much heads up as possible. And then the flip side of that is when you have really fast moving orgs that are doing, CI/CD very well, they're doing deploys weekly or daily even. those are the ones where you just have to sort of change the SLA model on its head and say, fine, like I'm going to find something today, but if you're doing weekly releases, the worst it's going to be present is a week. And for a lot of places, they would die to be able to kill a vulnerability in a week. So
Yeah.
like you just have to adjust how you look at it and be much more rational. The other SLA thing I like is, and honestly, this got forced upon me at Rackspace because Rackspace was moving so fast, was to say, hey, like here's an issue I can't understand because Rackspace's cloud and any cloud is very complicated and lots of moving pieces. I can't understand exactly what it's going to take to fix this thing. I know it's bad, and I know this is how bad it is. Let's have a conversation about what it takes to get this fixed. And I don't have an SLA of days. You know, a critical is 3 days, a medium is 5 days, or whatever your things are. I don't have that. I need a remediation plan in place. So for Rack, a critical needed a remediation plan in place in 24 hours. That's a plan where I can put a date in a calendar and hold you accountable. That's very different than I expect you, because we had one issue where we basically had to patch every hypervisor that made up our cloud, which is
Oh,
tens of
wow.
thousands of hypervisors. So like that is, you just can't do that in 24 hours unless you want to turn off Rack for a day and turn it back on, which has customer support implications. So right, that was just not feasible. And if I went into that meeting and said, I'm sorry, SLA says 24 hours, you need to fix this, I would have been pummeled or laughed out of
Yes.
the meeting if I'm
Yeah.
lucky. Right. So I just had to change my mentality. And it's amazing how much better those conversations come when you come with the rational expectation of like, look, this is a bad problem. Let's figure out how we're going to fix it. And most importantly, let's put some timelines around it. And you can help me determine what a rational timeline is rather
Hmm.
than this artificially imposed, we picked a day.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, remember that 10-year-old app that we were trying to get fixed, and we kept discovering weird things and new dependencies and all sorts of things in it. Like, it included for apps that included the name of the project manager in the credential string, and we were like, why?
What?
I'm sure somebody decided it was a good idea at the time for troubleshooting. They knew who to call. But yeah, it's the sort of thing where you will discover new things often as you go along. And so, like you said, it's not necessarily realistic to set an arbitrary deadline for these things.
Well, I think it's really important for the AppSec or the security side of the org to realize that they may have some level of visibility into what the rest of the business is doing, but not entirely, right? This may be a feature that's coming out in this release that you want to hold up that is a, 20% of your ARR.
Hmm.
Um, and that feature is making it out, period. Like you are
Yeah,
not
with or
stopping the
without you, it's
business
going out. Yeah.
from keeping that customer that's 20% of your business happy. Like you're just not. So you have to rationalize and understand that you have these confines outside of your security domain that are going to influence those decisions big time.
Yeah, yeah. And then finally, I'll just add one more. And this may sound kind of weird, but role-based awareness training. And by that, I don't mean, just making everybody watch the same 10-minute video and try to figure out how to hack it and, go straight to the quiz at the end or whatever. I did some research on security outcomes with the Scientia Institute, and we found that those who did role-based training were more likely to have a more robust security program. And this means, um, going to people outside of the security organization, throughout IT, throughout the business, and going, look, from your perspective, this is what a breach might look like. This is what
Mm.
you should keep an eye out for. These are the sorts of things we'd like you to report if you see them. And these are the sorts of decisions that we're going to rely on you to make in your capacity. And having that sort of training where anybody can go in your office and close the door and say, I think there's something you ought to know. That's really powerful.
Yeah, that sounds huge. I would love to say I've experienced that. I've never experienced that. But that sounds fantastic because you're right. The times that I have had, and I've done like informal training. I'm talking to a constituency. The way
Mhm.
that I've gotten uptick is to sit in their shoes and say, from your perspective, this is the things that you need to, Not unlike, honestly, like forever ago with a QA group, they wanted to increase their test coverage and they had some browser automation where they could automatically fill in forms with legit info. And I said, hey,
Mhm.
that's cool. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of just crazy, stupidly nutso strings.
Here, have
Just
some
drop
fun.
those in. And I don't need you to do anything but tell me if the app acts funny after you put in all these crazy strings. And then I'll sort out the rest, right? Yeah, and I got free fuzzing just by
Yeah.
giving the QA team a whole bunch of like weird, whatever script alerty kind of attack strings, right? Super easy. But I
Hmm.
sat in their shoes and I realized what their view of the world looks like. So let's make things better from a security perspective for you. Big difference.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, what else are we talking about?
Well, so you kind of got me thinking. And I 100% agree with your visibility, understanding the lay of the land statement you made early on. But so if I do have a broader picture of what's going on, that also means I have an inventory, right? Which is what you said technically. I have an
Theoretically.
inventory. That's great. Now I know the list of things to deal with. How do I prioritize them? How do I know which are the ones that I need to spend my time on?
Oh God, yeah, prioritization is really hard, and there are so many different ways to do it. Now, remember when we were trying to prioritize stuff at TEA, and we had that large sheet of paper on the back, taped on the back of my office door. What was it, Fear Factor or
Fear
something?
factor. Yep, is what we called it.
And we were just, slicing and dicing things different ways. There's, what can you realistically get fixed given, again, the resourcing that you're dealing with on the development side? Um, what are things that are going to be quick wins that'll be easy? What are things that are going to have the most impact? Fixing this, will fix things like across the board. What is important for that big feature that's going to help you with 20% of your ARR. And there's so many ways to prioritize it. But what's really interesting is that the Scienta Institute, together with Kenna, came out with a series of reports called Prioritization to Prediction. And they're excellent. They really dig into what actually makes a difference, what actually works in vuln management. And one of the things that I remember reading from one of the very early reports, it might even have been the first one, is that they plotted out all the different ways that you could prioritize remediation. Both for coverage, what would give you the biggest bang for the buck, and for precision, what is actually going to fix something that you know is a problem. And they said if you pick any one of those ways of prioritizing, your results are not going to be any better than random chance. I went, wow, that just blew my mind. And it seemed that the answer was to do like prioritize by all of them, like all the criteria. You might get a better combination of precision and coverage if you prioritize by all of them. But I don't even know how I would do that.
Well, and I made a somewhat attempt to do that with that fear factor spreadsheet because I took in how many users, like was it revenue generating, did it have a compliance aspect to it? I had all these, that's why I called it the fear factors. I just asked a bunch of factors about these apps and then tried to, honestly, I arbitrarily picked weights that when I ran a few through it that I knew well felt right, zero science there. But that was a very interesting exercise, and I think the other thing that's really important too, and you said this, and I think this has been crucial for the successes I've had, is there is just honestly the pragmatic question of what teams work well with security,
Hmm.
right? Because this may be the most important app, but if they are intransigent and hard to work with, I'm trying to pick polite words, um, you don't necessarily pick them as the first thing you're going after, right? You
Hmm.
you pick the easy win because at the end of the day, like let's be super pragmatic here. As somebody doing AppSec, I have somebody north of me on the food or the org chart rather who's going to say, I need to see that you're doing what you need to do to make this a better security place. And
Hmm.
I would much rather go in with a weak win than a strong loss, right? It's a
Yeah.
way better place to argue from.
Yeah. And there's another thing that people should know about, and that is don't simply go by criticality as reported in whatever these zone lists are, because their criticality is not your probability. And the other thing is don't simply go by the known exploited vulnerability list, the KEV list, because Scientia also found in another research report that 94% of the exploited vulnerabilities out there are not on the KEV list. So don't just stick to the KEV list when you're prioritizing.
Yeah, that is a heck of a trick. The other thing I've seen people do that's interesting is pick a class of vulnerabilities and try to kill that class, like across everything. Like this year, we're going to make sure we have parameterized SQL everywhere. Nobody does raw SQL, right? We move to ORMs if we're not using them. Whatever the fix is, depending on where you're starting from in terms of your security software maturity. And I found that to be really an interesting choice because I could see people argue, but what if you have this other type of vulnerability that's even more critical, bad, worse? But if you can kind of get the whole dev group thinking in a direction,
Yeah.
that is a much easier, like you just become the broken record as an AppSec person, right? Now we're talking about SQL injection, SQL injection, SQL injection, SQL injection, SQL injection, SQL injection. That's all you're going to hear from me for a year, right? Or whatever your time span is. And I think it really helps having a single solid message going out to the group rather than this, well, for you, it's this, and oh, I just found this other thing that's spooky and I have to explain to you. And then, oh, right, you don't have a message. You just have, well, a lot of times fear mongering, honestly.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's true. And um, the the prioritization is really difficult to pull off. But like you said, picking one thing at a time and going forward. Did you know that I heard about an application that was deliberately using SQL injection to update the database? And I can only think that the developer thought they were doing something really clever, that, wow, I'm going to do it this way. But yeah, if you had a web application firewall that was trying to block that, that would have completely broken the application.
Oh, yeah. Oh, geez.
Um,
Well, that
you just
reminds me
never
of
know what you're going to find.
you don't. That reminds me of a pen test where I found a QA harness that was in a obscure URL. It wasn't linked anywhere, so it was just an orphaned page basically in this web app or
Yeah.
route, I guess you could say. But if you went there, it provided a link of an example role with a login as. So it was a test harness so they
Yeah.
could log in as all of the 6 or 7, I don't remember how many roles, some number of roles. And it made, QA testing super easy. Well, that got whoopsed out to production.
Oh, it's not a backdoor, it's a test harness.
Yes. Except for I found it as a pen tester, and I certainly was not internal at that time. So, yeah, like those kind of things can be that. And it's kind of an interesting two-edged sword of the development world because using SQL injection to update the database of an application is a clever methodology, just not
Just
good
not
in the
good.
yeah, it's clever, but it's just not good. And certainly not operational and engineering and all that other good things you should be doing.
Yeah, yeah.
So, um, you've been kicking around the security space for a while, and you've gone from very large banks to state government when we
Mm.
were working together to industry analysts to large corporations. Is there a thing that you've seen or an advice you give, golden rule or whatever, that you would say you've learned over your career, particularly for, I'm thinking like this is happening for me now, I'm getting a little more gray. I'm talking to people that are very new to the field. I try to think of like, what would I want to know if I was just coming in? I'm a fresh CISO. What do I do?
Oh boy. Yeah, there are just so many different things that could be golden rules. And I guess if I were going to go meta on this, I would say I've learned that there's no golden rule that you can apply everywhere, that you always have to adapt what you're doing to your area. I know a CISO who, sat down and talked with his management about what they would do in the case of ransomware. And uh, they hadn't been taking it that seriously. Like they thought, okay, it won't happen to us. And so I said, okay, first of all, at what point, let's walk through a scenario with ransomware. At which point are we going to pay the ransom? And how are we going to do that? Should I set up a wallet right now? And that's when their eyes started getting big and they started thinking, okay, maybe this is a little bit more serious. And then he also said, at what point are you going to allow me to take down the network to stop the spread of ransomware? And did I mention this was a healthcare organization where he was?
Ooh,
Yeah, yeah. You
ooh.
don't take anything down. But that's what brought it home to them that this was a really serious discussion, and he had to walk them through it to make them realize this. Um, so, what I guess one golden rule that I think helps in a lot of cases is that security should not be a control function. It used to be when we were a lot younger, where you were the security organization, you told people what to do when they were supposed to do it. But that is not the case anymore. Security is supposed to be a service function, and you're helping everybody else do what they're supposed to be doing in a secure fashion. So, you're helping them and talking through what matters to them the most. First of all, if you do risk analysis with them and you let them come up with the answers, they're more likely to believe them than if you tell them what the answers are. Um, and the other thing is that um, your management and the rest of the organization may agree with the theoretical impact of something if you're talking about a risk, but they won't agree on the probability. They'll say, yes, if this happened, we would lose 11 billion in federal funding, but we just don't think it's going to happen. And I'm sure you run into that a lot in
Oh
your
yeah.
career. Yeah.
So
So
who would do that?
yeah, who would do that? That is the most common thing we heard all the time when we demonstrated an exploit. Well, who would do that? So, it's kind of riding the wave of helping them understand, first of all, that something is possible, and then that it is probable. And you're going to have to talk with them and go, how probable do you think this is? And sometimes it's like watching, the weather report and trying to decide if you're in the path of the hurricane or not. And you'll look at, well, okay, if it moves this way, then we're gonna, close up shop and do this. But we just don't know. And then you start going outside and going, is the wind picking up a little bit? Huh. Maybe we should go get those eggs and bread and milk. So the threat has to get closer before they will actually do anything about it. And if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense from a business point of view. A business person is not going to spend anything they don't absolutely have to until they need it.
Until they
And
have to.
and timing is everything. So if you get the timing right and you put it in right before you need it, then you win. But if you get the timing wrong and you haven't quite put it in yet, we see a lot of breaches where they were like, oh, yeah, we were going to roll out MFA next year. Oops. So it's, talking with them about, well, the wind is picking up. This is getting closer. Here are the chances. Or pointing out that there is a peer of theirs who has just gotten hit and they go, okay, I guess it is getting closer. I guess we should do something.
Yeah, the similar industry events are very powerful because it does, I think, drive home for a lot of people that, wow, this is real. Because I hear about it in, like, I don't know, like you said, you're in healthcare, but you hear about this in finance. Well, we're not in finance, we're in healthcare. We're in a different
Yeah.
vertical, right? Obviously, the bad guys are going after finance. That's where the money is. Well, the compute power and the ability to ransoms everywhere that has a computer that they want to keep running. So that argument doesn't exactly fall true anymore. The other thing that you said that I really want to double down on is, and I've said this to junior people all the time, is that context is king. It's everything.
Mhm.
Like, and I don't care if you're working at the CISO level or if you're working at the AppSec level. Like a SQL injection in a vulnerability in an app that like 10 internal users use in a globally, a 300,000 global company, 300,000 FTE global company, is irrelevant. It is absolutely irrelevant. But the like main website for that global company having SQL injection, that's super important. Same vulnerability, two different locations, two different importance. And the other something that I found honestly accidentally in my career when I've had to do sort of a on the fly paper napkin risk leveling of things is I went to the people who ran, this would be a DevOps person today, or it would be sysadmins back in the old days, but people who ran the machines or VMs that ran
Yeah.
the products and said, okay, look, I don't know, like a meteor hits the data center and everything goes down. What order would you start them back up in?
Oh, yes, yes,
And that's your priority order. Like it obviously the business has thought about this and done disaster recovery. So you would think it's safe to assume
hopefully.
that the thing they're going to start first is the most important from a business perspective. So I've backdoored getting a risk assessment just by talking to the DRM people to say, okay, like if everything went down, what's the first thing you'd fire back up?
Yeah, well, that's assuming that it is the prime thing and everything else is dependent on it, not necessarily other things that it's technically dependent on. The other thing that I want to emphasize to people is that there's an old joke about the two hitchhikers and a bear is coming and one is fixing tying his shoes and the other one says what are you doing? He says I don't have to outrun the bear, I just have to outrun you. That is not the case anymore with opportunistic attacks, with automation, with scale of attacks. There is more than enough bear to go around. So everybody is going to get hit by the bear. Don't assume that you just have to be better than your peers, because that's not going to help you.
No, that is a I 100% I couldn't agree with that more. I love that analogy because you're right. I've heard that for years, and that used to sort of be the case in the early days of the internet when there weren't a lot of attackers. You could kind of feel like that was right, but certainly anymore with the way people automate and spray and pray attacks and opportunistic attacks and just forget it. Like that just doesn't you put any listening port on the internet and give it what a minute and it's attacked or at least scanned, right? Like there is no hiding anymore. So you're what yeah. I guess
Yeah,
in an infinite supply of bears, like all of
bears, yeah,
Shakespeare
or
will get
something like
owned.
that. That's right. The Colorado Department of Transportation had a ransomware event a few years ago, and they wrote an excellent public report. It's out there if you search for it, where they talk about what happened. And what had happened was there was a cloud instance that a developer stood up, and it was supposed to be ephemeral. It was just, temporary for something they were going to do. So they didn't bother, setting all the controls or anything like that. And within 48 hours of it going live on the internet, the admin password got popped. And also, because it was just an ephemeral instance, it was kind of configured like everything else, and it was joined to the domain.
Oh boy.
So that's how the attacker got in. They were able to leverage that, get into the domain, and spread the ransomware. So it doesn't necessarily matter what you think your crown jewels are, what you think the most criticality is. Anything can be a vector for lateral movement, which is again why having the coverage in your inventory is so important. Even the things that you don't think are important can end up being important.
Well, you and I met over a pen test result that was several low to medium findings that were chained together into an OMG moment.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
If you recall, like I'm not going to spill the beans on this, although I'm sure the statute of limitations. I think I'm
We finally
NDA'd
got
as
it
well.
fixed like 5 years later, I think.
Well, the NDA is still in place for me, so I'm not going to say anything specific. But that's a perfect example of a couple of these feeling unimportant things, just like the Department of Transportation, where it's just a test instance, throw it up, it does it. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
But suddenly that's the vector that gets you popped. That's a very different environment from how it air quote used to be. That's an interesting aspect too for me of cloudy things, right? Because back in
Mhm.
the day, you would have racked and stacked a thing in a data center probably on a different network segment because you had a network person who was controlling switches and all the good old day stuff that you used to do that was slow, mind you. Like there wasn't like that was a free lunch.
Yeah.
Um, but you did have these things in place where now it's like boop, boop, boop. I've got a VM fired up in a VPC that may or not be shared, may or may not be shared with interesting things. It may or may not have other things that auto get allocated to it via my Ansible or Terraform or whatever I'm using to roll out infrastructure dynamically. Yeah, suddenly you really have to think through those decisions because they feel free,
Yeah.
but they're not.
They
They
do.
have consequences.
They do, they do. And, if anybody's has enough time to sit there and watch a log going by of these sort of instances popping up and being able to call somebody and go, what are you doing? Um, I don't know if anybody can successfully do that.
No, no, not at all. And the only way if I had to take a lesson out that I would teach somebody going into AppSec today, it would be figure out a way to make your work looking at the diffs. And so we did this at
Yeah.
Rackspace with how we deployed infrastructure. So it was all depending on the team because this was Rackspace, right? Some of it was Ansible, some of it was Chef, some of it was Salt. It was whatever it was, but they had, infrastructure as code pushing out infrastructure. So what the product security team would do is bless a version of that infrastructure as code. And you could launch that one time or 20,000 times, we didn't care. But the minute a pull request got merged or wanted to get merged into that infrastructure as code, we got into the loop and we had to go, yeah, no, that's fine. Or, ooh, what? No, 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 no. Right. And I took the work from having to understand all of our infrastructure to just understanding how we output our infrastructure. Right. And suddenly, once we got those blessed versions, the future work for the security team was just any changes to those. And if you wanted to keep your same way that you deployed your thing, fine, like keep it for a year. I don't care. Like it's only when you want to change the thing that I already know is cool and is automated, right? Then I got to come in and kind of take a look over your shoulder. But the work is also tiny. It's not like we're talking hundreds of lines of infrastructure as code get blessed, and the deltas are 4 lines, 7 lines, right?
Mhm.
Like 10 minutes of work if you're pretty clueful in that particular infrastructure as code. Not a lot of work to understand, like, oh, we do need to retest this, or oh, that's a non-consequential change. I don't care. That can go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
No.
no one has the, I mean, I don't think I'd have enough machines to scan the infrastructure that Rack had. Right? If I want to do the old school, like fire up, infrastructure scanner of choice and point at all the IPs, not to mention they were ephemeral and came up and down, so I could scan one today and it wouldn't be there in an hour. Like you just have to change your
And it's gone.
mindset.
Yeah.
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 Like, hey, that thing is completely vulnerable. What thing? It's not there anymore. Oh, well, never mind. Right?
Yeah.
Like, not a great place to be if you're the security person.
Yeah.
So, I know you've talked about in the past a wonderful term, the security poverty line, right? I love that phrase. I'm glad that sort of made it somewhat into the security nomenclature. But can you talk about what inspired you to bring that up and how that kind of came to being and what that is for those who haven't heard that term? Because I just think that's a very useful concept.
Yeah, I mean it's really, just the line below which an organization cannot defend itself for a lot of reasons. And I know some people don't like the word poverty because they feel it's derogatory. I don't happen to think it is, but I chose it deliberately because there are so many dynamics that make it difficult for an organization to do what it needs to do. And the story of, how what first prompted it was when I walked into a certain organization. My first day on the job, I was the only security person. They had never done security before. And the person said, we need your budget request by the end of business today. So I wrote down, I asked for $2,000. Like I wanted a logging server and a couple of books. And the person I was reporting to at the time scribbled it out and said, where do you think you are, the private sector? So I had zero people and zero budget when I started that. And experiencing how difficult it is to get things done for security led me later as an analyst to start writing about it because I felt, organizations are not going to get up on a stage at RSA and say, yeah, we can't patch
Right.
because of this and that and the other thing. So I felt it was incumbent on me to speak for the people who couldn't speak for themselves and say, look, this is a real problem. And nowadays, yes, the idea is picking up, and there are more people who are trying to do something about it, which is just great to see. Craig Newmark of Craigslist is funding a lot of initiatives under what he describes as cyber civil defense. And it's really, helping secure the citizens as well as, the infrastructure that we all rely on. That it shouldn't be every organization for itself. It should be, we should be doing this jointly. So I'm really excited about that, especially trying to secure nonprofits. I'm on the board of Sightline Security, which helps nonprofits figure out where they are in security and what they need. But nonprofits are what I call the other critical infrastructure. They are, if they go down, human, you know, human trafficking victims don't get rescued, people don't get fed, they don't get housed. Think of everything that charities do, and they can't do it if they fall victim to an attack. So all of this is really important.
Well, and those are the orgs that aren't going to have a deep bench of IT. I mean, just by their
No,
very
no.
nature, like they won't. I mean, like I used to do IT for OWASP many years ago. I mean, but that's a whole group of security people. Like they are not in the same situation as somebody who's doing human trafficking or like a food bank or any of those kind of things that just won't have that. They're just happy to have people that can help them, deal with the problem they're dealing with, let alone the sort of nuances of IT and security. So that's a huge thing.
And it's all about their mission. And if you can, one of the things I love about Sightline is they try to cast the security issues in light of what that nonprofit's mission is, and it helps them appreciate, better what's important to them. And that the other great thing that you may not know about nonprofits is that they're so used to doing a lot with little that if help them identify a problem, they will be able to fix it really fast because they're used to doing that, turning around. They don't have a lot of bureaucracy, that if it is something that is threatening their mission, they're going to take care of it.
Well, and talk about like a mission driven group. Like the fact that
Mhm.
you like any kind of work I've done with nonprofits, yes, they will get stuff done because they realize that impacts their mission, and the whole reason they're there is that
Yeah,
mission. And
yeah,
honestly, that like bluntly for people in nonprofits, they're not at the high end of the pay scale generally too. So if you're there, you really care about the mission because you walked away from a chunk of a potential salary.
right, right,
Yeah,
absolutely.
the one other thing too that I've seen of late that I think has just been really a positive growth is, and honestly, like forever ago, 8+ years ago, when we open sourced Defect Dojo, we did that because like in all of the open source tools that exist now today allow people with zero budget to at least get something. Like maybe the reporting isn't great, but I can at least get some results and do something about them for $0 and off budget. And I've like it's been interesting watching Defect Dojo where a lot of customers, because we have 190 now security tools that we can ingest, which is just mind-boggling.
Wow.
They're like want to dip their toe into container security, just picking an area. They'll start with an open source tool. Defect Dojo can read it in and make sense of it, and they can at least get a feel for, oh, like we're doing okay here, or OMG, this is
Yeah.
neglected and we've been sweeping, dirt under that rug for a long time. We need to go like get serious here. So I think one nice aspect is that the growth of open source security tools has really helped drive down the position of that poverty line where you can zero budget these things. The trade-off is manpower, right? You have to
Yeah,
FTE
you still
time.
need the people, and that's
Yeah.
the problem. If you're trying to outbid a security vendor for somebody with a lot of security experience, you're going to lose. So that's the other problem is having and free training is not the answer because expertise isn't just training, it's also having the experience and skills to know what to do with something you've never seen before, because that's, what we're doing all day, every day in cybersecurity. We're going, wow, that just happened. Okay, now what do we do?
Okay, well, it
And
looks, I think we've
on
got,
that pause, we do have
yeah,
an actual question.
okay.
Um, just because we're coming up on 5 minutes, so I want to make sure we get this in. How would you begin an AppSec program in an organization that is pure ad hoc development? No QA, QC, out of outside of intended functionality, no IV and V, which you may even define that for people, and no clue why this is bad.
Wow, that almost sounds like, when I hired you, Matt.
It does. Do you want to take the first swing at this, or shall I?
Yeah, how do you start? Well, I'll throw something out and then you can correct me. Um, yeah, having no understanding of why it's bad means, having a lot of discussions again, and aligning it with peers and saying, we've seen this happen, this and this and this. Yes, it is probable, and people are not going to like it, but we are going to have to try to corral this activity. I did see one organization when I was an analyst that managed to renegotiate all of their contracts with their providers and indemnify themselves from everything, including Microsoft. They got Microsoft to change their contract.
Wow.
But it took them 2 years and a whole raft full of lawyers. And, I don't think we'll ever see that again. So yeah,
Not not
I'll pass it
scalable.
to you now. Yeah, that's not scalable.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you said. That I'm shocked that they were able to do that. That's amazing. The indemnification just blows my mind. I've used a combination of things when I've gone into a place that is not yet woken up to the security message. Some of it is help me understand. Help me understand why when I put a single tick into the search field, the app pukes on the screen. Right? Like, is it supposed to do that? Is that a
Is it supposed
requirement?
to
I
do
don't.
that? Yeah.
That's funny because it doesn't seem right. Like I just go in with the I'm dumb and don't understand, please help me understand perspective because it somewhat is disarming. I'm not like threatening. I'm like, oh my God, you wrote the stupidest thing ever. I can't believe, right? That doesn't win you any friends. The other thing is just I think trying to get a handle of, like you said, the lay of the land, the context, right? Is what is important to this org and what can I find from a security perspective that threatens what's important to the org? Sometimes this is don't appear in the newspaper, right? I don't want to get bad press. Okay, fine. This is how I see this getting you bad press. Ooh, we need to fix that. Yeah, we probably should. Let's talk about it, right? Sometimes it's I have a compliance requirement. We're PCI, and this could violate our PCI. And we can't take credit cards. That's a problem. So I tried to hook into things that resonated with the business to get them started to think in that area rather than just starting to look at everything from a purist security perspective. And I'd even it was a fun one. This actually happened where you and I worked together. There was an application that wanted to take credit cards. They said, "Hey,
Yes.
we want to take credit cards," and I'm like, "Oh, well, that's really interesting. There's some regulations around that. Have you considered that?" No, but I can't be that bad. I'm like, "Well, let me get those for you, and I'll give them to you, and you can just add them to your requirements list," knowing that there was no way we were going to be able to cover the hurdles that PCI asked for. And I printed out this huge stack of things and handed it to the PM, and they went, "Oh my goodness." I'm like, "Yeah, there's companies that'll just handle this for you if you want." They're like, "Oh, really? Yeah, yeah, you just outsource all of that." They're like, "Oh, we should do that." Yeah, yeah, we might want to do
Oh,
that.
that's funny because at the very same time when I started there, I asked some developers, I said, do we process credit cards? And they said no. They said there's a third party that does that. And I said, okay, great. And then I realized I should have been more specific. So I went back months later and said, in our applications, does anybody type in their credit card number? And they said, oh yeah. And then they handed over to the processor. And I said, can we not do that? And it took a few months to take that out and fix it.
Yeah, it was not a quick thing, but it was one of those ones where if you can sort of, I let the PM in that case understand the cost of their choice. Like I didn't
Mhm.
say no. I said, great, but if you choose that, here's what you get to deal with. Or you just pay this company and hand it off and like
Yeah.
you don't have to deal with it. And they were like, ooh, that's much better. I mean, did the same thing for data validation. We did this, I did it at first at TEA and I did it a bunch of other places where I would talk about standardizing how we took, like a phone number looks like this, an address looks like this, a name looks like that. And we standardized what we considered to be those kind of standard data. And then we wrote regexes basically for all of that. And those became our de facto data quality standards, but they also like took a whole swatch of injection attacks off the table because I couldn't put a greater than in a phone number because it didn't match the regex.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, so it's finding out what the it's. I mean, it's honestly like most things, finding out what people will hear and using those words. You don't speak German to somebody in France, you speak French to them because that's what they hear.
That's a
Exactly.
great point. And we are coming up on time. We're actually at time, but if you want either one of you or both to give just some parting advice and closing words to the audience, we'd appreciate it.
Let's see. Well, if you do nothing else, here's something that not enough organizations do is exercise your incident response and business continuity recovery capabilities. My friend Nick Selby, who works for Evertas now, which is an insurance company, he says that they rarely ever see that being practiced. And it doesn't take, it just takes up people's time. But some of the best organizations I've seen actually practice a tabletop where one person from every line of business gets on the phone on the conference call once a week and they go through the scenario and then they go, okay, we don't need you. We don't need you. You can get off. But it gets the business used to knowing that they are also responsible for helping to respond to an incident. They can't just leave it in the laps of security. And the more different ways that you practice incidents and scenarios, the better and stronger you're going to be. This is also backed by research that we did. And so just practice it. We don't know what budgets are going to do next year, but this is something you can sit around and do kind of for free, assuming you can get everybody to take part in it.
Yeah, I love that. Well, there's nothing like planning when there isn't a fire.
Yes.
Yeah, if I had to say one thing, for me, every time I've run a team or run a group or a product security or whatever, you're always resource constrained. And so for me, the more systems I could put in place to get an inventory, to use Wendy's point again, and understand the context that I'm working in, have a better picture, the more I can allocate those scarce resources on the most important things. And I think that just gets overlooked. I think there's a lot of like, hey, we're really spooked about X, so we're going to like completely focus on X, but Y is actually more important. It's just not on our radar. And if you have that broad picture, you can have. I've had interesting conversations with people of like, yes, that is really scary, but how about this other thing that we talked about 2 weeks ago? They're like, oh, I totally forgot about that other thing. We should, yeah, we need to keep on that. Okay, I'm going to take one of my FTEs off and work on this new scary
Yeah.
thing, and we're going to keep the rest of them on the big scary thing that we found a month ago or whatever it was. And if you don't have that kind of visibility, you'll end up making these like context switching changes that just get you nowhere productively.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great point. And that's it. I want to thank both Wendy and Matt for being with us today. Great questions, great discussion, and we will have the recording available for everyone. So thanks again. Have a great day.